Awesome. Hey everybody, my name is Joe Panicelli. I'm here with Big Five features, and we're it's a new web series that we're launching to sort of talk about the Philadelphia Big Five tradition and some of the people that make up this great tradition. Today we're joined with a very special guest. We have Mike Jensen of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Mike has been with the Philadelphia Inquirer for about 35 years, I believe, and has been covering the Big Five and the surrounding basketball communities for about 30 years, right? Mike, it's a pleasure to have you here, and thanks a lot for coming on.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me, Joe. You got the years right
Awesome.
somehow.
Awesome. Yeah. So like I said, we talked a little bit before, and I've seen that, a lot of times you provide your insight into some of the X's and O's and strategy type stuff, and some of the big name players of the current tradition of the current form of the Big Five. But today we kind of sort of wanted to get a little bit more of your insight into the history of the Big Five, the tradition, sort of how you came to play a role in the Big Five and just Philly basketball in general. So something that's sort of always interested me about journalism and journalists and reporters is that you're naturally and inquisitively sort of interested in other people's stories and sharing other people's stories. So I kind of wanted to dive in to your story because you rarely get to hear sort of the stories of people who actually report on people. So for you, was did you have a sort of a knack for storytelling first, or did you have sort of a love for basketball or athletics? That which one sort of came first to you?
That's interesting. Probably back to when I was a kid,
Yeah.
both. It was just both tracks. I was a really bad 6'5" high school QB backup center, but played every day.
Yeah.
Just wasn't good at it. So, there was that track, but also I grew up outside New York. I was born in Boston, family moved to Manhattan, and then New York uh, suburbs, ended up in Peekskill, New York, and my family always had 4 or 5 newspapers. My mom was actually the big sports fan in the family, and so reading the New York papers just religiously. I wasn't thinking in terms of a future career
Yeah.
as a sports writer. I just liked to read about the teams and cared about it a lot as a kid, as a sports fan. So that's dual tracks. And then when you talk about sort of like, it was definitely became the writing side more than the basketball side. I don't do this because I wanted to stay close to sports.
Yeah.
I sort of do this because I don't know how to do anything else. But that was sort of true from the start. I went to Vanderbilt University and I was in poli sci classes, and I really thought I was going to law school, but they were boring me. So I ended up switching. They didn't have journalism. I started the school paper first semester and was covering the rugby team. I told the story before about how covering the rugby team was great because the game ended and they wheeled a keg right out onto the field and they handed a cup of beer to the
Wow.
coach and they handed a cup of beer to me. I thought this sports writing thing is great.
Yeah.
That obviously never happened again
Yeah.
anywhere, but as a you know college freshman, it got me started in that. And the truth was, at the time, uh, in the Southeastern Conference, Herschel Walker has been in the news quite a bit lately. Was the same class freshman tearing it up at Georgia. I mean, basketball, Dominique Wilkins, Charles Barkley, Sam
Wow.
Bowie in Kentucky. I mean, Bear Bryant was still coaching Alabama. So all this stuff was going on. So for a college sports writer at a twice a week college newspaper, it was great stuff.
Wow, that's incredible. And so you said you started with rugby there. Is that a specific thing, or you just sort of start with sports and just got assigned a random?
Oh, yeah, started sports and it was complete, entry level. Somebody was going to cover the soccer team who maybe had played soccer. Somebody
Yeah.
was going to cover the tennis team that way. I don't think anyone had played rugby. Jensen, you cover the rugby team. But then I was covering basketball by that winter, so it was great.
And what are your thoughts on the state of sort of the current state of sports journalists? You mentioned there wasn't even a journalism program when you were there, and actually at St. Joe's when I went there, you actually came to talk to our sports journalism class. So I assume you probably do that a good bit with some of the Philly schools around here. So what do you get from those classrooms? In the industry that maybe some people say there's less interest in the position that there may be before, and do you still find that those are meaningful discussions that you have with those young journalists?
Yeah, they're hard discussions, and I didn't mind that there wasn't journalism at my college. Being an English major wasn't a bad way to go. Just reading like all the time, that was
Yeah.
fine. But you had to supplement it in other ways, because I find students coming in from journalism schools, they have skills that are so far advanced from what I had coming out of school. So I respect it. But as far as your question, talking to students about the present state of journalism, never mind sports journalism, it's hard, because I mean, my standard line is everyone reads more than ever. It might be about themselves in different ways, but they get information in different ways. I mean, the trick is the business models have all changed. Nobody who starts tomorrow at the Philadelphia Inquirer is going to be there for 35 years, I presume. The business models for newspapers changed so completely. We've had 5 different ownership structures in maybe the last 15 years at the Inquirer. Yep. We used to just print money. I mean, they couldn't figure out how to spend it. I mean, we sent somebody to the America's Cup. Al Morganti, who's been on WIP forever, they sent him to Perth, Australia for like 5 weeks. And this is not a sailing town. It might be a rowing town. It's not a sailing town, but they just sent everyone to everything. Now that's not true. We cover Philadelphia. We try to cover it better than anybody. We're owned by a nonprofit, which kind of works out because we're sort of non-profitable, but we don't have to make money, but we can't lose money. And that's where we are. So we try to cover Philadelphia that way. And for your generation, trying to figure out, how to use skills and be nimble, I think it still is completely plausible, but whether, mainstream media might not be the route. It used to be, well, you could go to a smaller paper and work your way up. That's not really the path. Those papers have just struggled, and
Yep.
they have just simply gone away.
And I know you're also sort of very active on Twitter. I see you got some Twitter fingers. You're posted on there. Has that been a conscious thing for you to sort of interact on the social media and be a part of those conversations, or is that something that just you personally enjoy? Or
Yeah, it's kind of some of both. Just sort of evolve, and and if I have something stupid to say, it Twitter's a great place to say it. Or if I have a remark that doesn't work as a story, I'll say it. But also, if I'm at a game, sometimes, and I've talked to other of our reporters about this, sometimes it's not a bad sort of headline service to yourself. Like if you're tweeting about something that's interesting, well, go back and look at the tweets and make sure those things are in your story or your column or whatever. I mean, obviously I take notes, and I have a system of how I headline sort of my own notes that I want to keep track of within notes, but Twitter serves that purpose. So, if it goes away, it'll be interesting to see what replaces it, in the future. But it is served fairly well, and it's also kind of my substitution for a newspaper, I guess, where I'm just scrolling through and getting pretty much all the news I need and want.
definitely. And something I've spoke with journalists before is just something about sort of the pandemic when we sort of transferred over from a lot of people attending live games or not even be able to have any fans and stuff. Obviously, a big part of your job is picking up sort of the atmosphere of the arena, some little stuff that you'd never be able to pick up, from a Zoom call or watching on TV that you might miss out on. But say it's a big 5 game or something different. How's that transition been for you from having a lot more Zoom calls and almost, missing out on those normal routines that you've become accustomed to over the past years?
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird time in all sorts of ways. I mean, there are a couple of different angles to that. I mean, you're exactly right that our job, if we're going there, is to tell people what we can see that maybe A, if they weren't at the game, they didn't see. B, if they're at the game but not allowed in the press conferences and all the rest, we're supposed to be their eyes and ears, and including, like, if I was writing a story, I never wanted to write a story that I could have just written from home. You want to tell people what it's like to be there, and all of a sudden you're not there. You were literally at home. So the stories were impacted by that, just period. I mean, I think flip side is early in the pandemic, say the first 6 months in 2020, after March of 2020, you could reach people. I mean, because I've been doing it for so long, I've got a long contact list on my phone, and everyone else was at home and they would answer the call. So there were no shortages of stories to write. I never ran out. That part of it wasn't a problem. And I consider my job to write stories, not to just be games or, oh my God, what do I do if there's no game? I mean,
Yeah.
that's not my job. I'm even now, I've written a million game stories over my career, but that's actually not part of my job description generally.
Yeah. And what's it like for you? You mentioned the contact Rolodex you have of all these great relationships you've built over the past. Is there challenges with, being a truthful reporter and giving your true opinion on things where you might have strong relationships with some of these coaches or personnel within the Big Five? And, what's that like with you sort of towing the line sometimes if you have a story that might not be as favorable as they might hope with the state of the team or the state of the program when you're sort of have these relationships with these guys?
Well, I mean, yeah, I have relationships, and most of them have been friendly enough relationships, and colleges are different than pros, but they're being paid very well for those salaries. And I would put it this way: I have a lot of friends. They have a lot of friends. I don't
Yeah.
go to dinner with them. I've never been in any of their houses.
Yep.
So it's not a factor. And as far as having most of them understand
Yeah.
what the gig is.
Absolutely.
So that part, I really, I can't remember the last time I sat down and thought, "Ooh, I wonder what this person is going to think of this." That's just
Yeah.
not the gig.
You can't have that perspective when you're covering these beats. So I do want to switch over to sort of some of the more Big Five stuff, and I saw an article on Crossing Broad the other day about the Big Five doubleheader at the Palestra and how sort of the attendance was down majorly. I think there was about 3,000 people there for the doubleheader, and there's about 5,000 for the Barstool Invitational that was at Wells Fargo. It had some mid majors that were not the biggest showcase teams, around there. So I was wondering, from your perspective, is that sort of indicative to the ebbs and flows of the Big Five, or is that something to be concerned about as far as fan bases and the tradition and the appetite for the tradition?
Yeah, well, I got all sorts of answers to that. I guess let me put it this way: as far as double headers, I'm not one of these rah rah. Let's have a lot of double headers. The heyday of the Big Five double headers, where they all played all their games at the Palestra. There'd be a double header with one game being between two Big Five teams, and then a second Big Five team playing somebody from out of town.
Yeah.
Like, so I've been at the Inquirer for 35 years. Those were gone when I got here. That was a relic of a different age. So sometimes they've come back as one-offs, and that's all good. As it happened this year, I mean, none of those teams have been in the NCAA tournament in the last few years. None of them had, I came up with a stat. It was the day after Thanksgiving. Villanova had just lost out in Portland one of their games. They were going to lose again, but they lost to fall under 500. That for some reason, the morning after Thanksgiving, I was the only one up, and I started checking this stat. I said, has there ever been a day that, when's the last time all the Big Five teams had a losing record on the same day? And I went back and I started back, and you can go through basketballreference.com
Yeah.
because they have dates of games. That's what I was looking for, the dates. And the answer, the last time all five had a losing record, was never in the history of the Big Five.
Wow.
So going back to 1955.
Wow.
It didn't last. Villanova got back above water. Temple got back above water. LaSalle is 500 right now. But it was, point being, this isn't a high water mark.
Yep.
It's been a high water decade for Villanova.
Yeah.
But the others, they weren't playing that day at the Palestra. I wasn't there. I was out of town.
Mhm.
but they are looking to see what else they can do. They have talked in the past. I wrote a story about it last week.
Yep.
Um, they had talked in the past about having a tournament and looked at it, but different schools have different agendas. You go to St. Joe's. You've been a St. Joe's guy. It was not necessarily in their interest to not have Villanova show up on Hawk Hill every other year.
Yeah.
So that, every school has different wrinkles of what works for them and what doesn't. But right now, when only 3,000 people are showing up for 4 of the Big Five teams, a tournament is being looked at seriously. Another reason it's being looked at is that Villanova, with the Big East bringing UConn back, they're up to 20 league games. And if you start adding a schedule with 20 league games, a tournament with 3 games, that's 23, 4 Big Five games, that's 27. That leaves them for like 2 national games. So
Yeah.
if they can get I guess schedule relief is the term, and suddenly only be playing 2 games if they're good enough to have a bye in a Big Five tournament, that helps Villanova and keeps them in the fold. Adding Drexel to the mix makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned Villanova, I mean, it's hard to ignore sort of the success they've had as opposed to the other programs, specifically in the last decade. Does Villanova, does Jay Wright, do they sort of, is it possible that they don't maybe get the full credit they deserve for sort of sticking around, or is it sort of par for the course as far as the scheduling you talked about? Do they sort of have a duty, you think, to sort of stick around in this, or what's your take on that, I guess?
Well, a little bit of the history. Raleigh Massimino got blamed correctly for kind of doing away with that, saying we can't play all these games. And he was doing it because he wanted some easier games at the time.
Yeah.
He only wanted to play a couple. And then if he was going to play American or UNC Wilmington or whoever as scheduled wins. So it dropped in the early 90s for some years to just a partial round robin, only 2 games per schools. Most of the others were still playing all the games, but only 2 of them counted. And that's not the Big Five. Nobody knew which games were Big Five games. So it really took it down. He's also blamed, and I think this is incorrectly, for taking them out of the Palestra. Well, having games at the Pavilion, everyone now plays on their campuses. Temple was right there at the same time as Villanova doing that. But for the City Series, the round robin, it was really Steve Lapis, Massimino's successor, who decided, let's bring it back to the full round robin. They did that. Jay Wright was always paying homage to the Big Five and why it was worthwhile for Villanova.
Mm-hmm.
I think it interestingly, I think despite them just running roughshod over the Big Five, say for the last decade, they ran roughshod over the Big East too, and that was what they were doing.
Yeah.
But I think it would better serve them, Villanova. I mean, if the rest of the Big Five was doing better, because if it hurts your computer ranking if you're playing teams with lousy records.
Yeah, and especially because we just saw it happen with Temple. I mean, they lost to Temple at home. I saw a lot of conversations online about the storming the court, Villanova fans saying, "Oh, this is your guys' Super Bowl. You guys, for us, this is just another game. For you guys, this is just your Super Bowl game." Storming the court's a little overmuch. But my perspective on it was, for the last 10 years, a win like that is about as big as it gets for Temple. And as far as, the tradition and also sort of how Villanova has been so dominant in the last decade. So I have no problem with that. I thought it was warranted. So what were your thoughts on that when you saw them storming the court?
Yeah, I mean, Villanova fans who kind of poo-pooed it, that's them not understanding their own place in the sport. They've been in 3 Final Fours and won 2 championships since 2016, and Temple hadn't beaten them. And I can't remember, it was a decade, whenever it was, a little over that, whatever it was. So yeah, that was warranted. And then some Temple fans said to me, "Hey, we'll know we're back when opposing fans are back storming the court against us.
Yeah.
They weren't complaining about storming the court. They were just saying, this is where we are. Our huge win, obviously. Less big since then because Villanova was struggling. Now Cam Whitmore's back and they're a better team. We talk about that. That they're back being sort of the team we thought they would be. When Whitmore was going to be playing. They still don't have Justin Moore. I think they're a top 10 team with a healthy Justin Moore and a healthy Cam Whitmore. But also, we thought that was a huge win for Temple.
Yeah.
Well, it was, and then it wasn't, because 2 days later they lose to Vandy in overtime. And I just wrote a column that's online now about, what's their identity? They're a 6-5 team, and they're a confusing 6-5 team.
One of the wackiest seasons for them, I feel like, for in a long time. And speaking of, I'll actually be there this Saturday, tomorrow, for the Holy War. Could you provide some historical context to that, as far as maybe not necessarily like win percentages or something, but how that specifically came to be? Is it just because they're the Catholic schools in the conference? And what's a win for St. Joe's? Is it staying in the game? Is it putting up a good effort in front of their home fans? What's a positive approach for them?
Yeah, as far as historically, yeah, you got it. That if it was Catholic school kids from similar schools who considered their schools to be very different, but they're so close to each other, natural rivalry, bigger rivalry for St. Joe's in the last, I don't know how many years, decades, than for Villanova, maybe, since they got in the Big East and consider Georgetown, Syracuse, St. John's, whoever's been around, and then whoever's good in the Big East to be even bigger. For St. Joe's tomorrow what's a win for them? Well, a win.
Yeah, I figured that was coming.
I mean, they played them close. I mean, they almost got them. Was it the last time on Hawk Hill with Ryan Daly? And they can play them close, and I'm not disparaging if they play them close. You walk out of there and say, okay, that wasn't bad for St. Joe's, but and I know Cam Whitmore makes Villanova a different team, but Portland beat them.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited. I think I just bought some tickets. They were like $70 on one of those secondary sites, so better be a good game. So
I'll be there.
Oh, awesome! Hopefully, I'll see you there. So I was curious about, the college basketball world was sort of turned on its head over the last year between the portal rules, and also the NIL. I'm curious for your perspective. It's such a difficult thing when you're talking to these coaches about scheming, planning for the next year, when you don't even know if these guys are going to be there. You don't know. You might have a completely different team this year. I think I saw thousands and thousands of kids who transferred in the portal this year. From the perspective of the Big Five, I was hoping you could sort of break it down from maybe like 3 tiers of what the portal means and what are the challenges for them. So you get Villanova, obviously, as their own tier. Maybe a team like Temple in the middle, and then sort of the lower level teams who might be in jeopardy of losing their top guys, but maybe sort of getting some more guys from those other mid majors or higher schools that aren't getting the playing time. What are the challenges and what are the benefits for those like sort of 3 tiers of like the LaSalle, Penn, St. Joe's? And
massive challenges, including in Villanova. Even, I mean, they have to re-recruit their own players, especially now throw in the NIL world, where there literally can be offers from the outside world that you can, if you're have a good season and can make money based on that's another challenge that is real. So, I mean, Villanova generally has been a recipient of transfers. If they lose transfers, it is most often because those players weren't being on the court. Whether it's Javon Quinterly, who's
Alabama.
a talent at Alabama, whether it's Dylan Painter going and being starting center at Delaware and showing that was a great level for him. That's what they've done. They've had Eric Paschal come in. They've had more recently, Caleb Daniels from Tulane. He was the leading scorer at Tulane, then he transferred. So they've done okay in the portal. Temple has done okay in the portal too. 3 of their 5 starters. Jameel Reynolds just got hurt, but best big man they've had in a little while. or a lot of while. It could be, in the last 10 years for sure.
Mm.
Came from Central Florida. He just had thumb surgery. He's going to be out, but he was a factor, a player. Damian Dunn and Khalif Battle both started elsewhere.
Yep.
Um, they lost a player who I think really could have helped them this year. And Jelani Williams went to Iowa State, got hurt. He's out this season. But he could have helped Temple a lot. So it's a weird dynamic where you're trying to recruit freshmen, but if you can get a guy who's a fourth year guy, can a freshman get on the court? So it's got to be a talented freshman. I think so. I'm not even sure Temple's in a different category than St. Joe's or LaSalle or even a Drexel. Penn's a different category that we can talk about. They have wrinkles that are unique to the Ivy League.
Ivy League. Yep.
But these others just re-recruiting every year and then understanding that some guys are going to move on. That's the way it is. It's a massive challenge at all these schools, but that's the way of the world.
Yeah, and it's a constant challenge for sort of the schools at all levels. Worried about your school is sort of like St. Joe's. They've had great success with maybe one of their best centers they've had in a while with Obina, Edge Obina, from Vanderbilt as well. And then I also thought it was funny. I think it was Shane Dozenier from Vanderbilt committed to St. Joe's, and then he went to Temple. I don't know. Has he been playing this year?
He has not been playing. He has not gotten on the court. So I'm not sure so far, not getting on the court at Temple. There's no reason to think he would have been this huge difference maker at St. Joe's, but they've got, Lynn Greer started Dayton, came over. So they're certainly very, very active in the portal.
Mm-hmm. So I asked a similar question earlier, but what do you think during the pandemic or, the off year of basketball, what do you think this city really misses out on besides, what did they really miss out on, or what was the harmful impact besides maybe some like financial issues or impacts that were obviously happened because of there weren't games going on. So what does the city sort of miss out on if this tradition were to go away?
It's interesting because right now it's just sort of hanging on by a thread. So I think that's almost up to younger generations. Do they want to be at college sports events as alumni?
Yep.
And personally, I think it's good bang for your buck, but I never tell people how to spend their money. So, we'll see. And again, I don't think it's so much on the fans. You win basketball games, people show up. I mean,
yep.
It's a tough ticket tomorrow in Hawk Hill because Villanova's there. It's a tough ticket at every home game at the Pavilion because Villanova's been good, and they can sell a heck of a lot of tickets at the Wells Fargo Center. So sometimes we shouldn't overthink it and think, boy, fans don't want to do that anymore. No, they want to get excited, I think. You just have to give them a reason to.
Yeah, and then you add in the factor as well that, a school like Villanova now might have gained some national fans, whereas a St. Joe's isn't necessarily going to have too many fans that aren't, sort of local to this area or know someone who has an alumni.
Yeah, or people interested in it, but I see more just Villanova stuff than ever. Whether it's flags, people wearing shirts, all the swag, you see that, and you didn't see it as much before. So I think that usually I'm not sure that there is this massive effect on a school from success, but we've kind of seen it from Villanova.
Yeah, unparalleled success. And this is sort of an interesting question, but as as covering sports for so long in Philadelphia, the sort of the national perspective or maybe the generalization of Philadelphia sports fans is not always the most pleasant. I think they're notorious Eagles fans, Phillies fans, Sixers fans. They're almost notorious for their passion as much as they are for sort of their debauchery or some sort of the stereotype that comes around with sort of the professional sports fans in the city. Do you think that the Big Five has sort of the fans of the Big Five or big college basketball? Do they have a generalized persona, or is it just sort of different based on the teams?
I think it's a little different. I think it's a little sort of gauzier, feel good. The college scene and the pros. You're not generally having tailgating beer drinkers for 6 hours before the college games. I also think that's all overrated. I don't think the Philadelphia fans are really any different than
Right.
certainly other Eastern fans. And things happen in LA and they happen in Cleveland, they happen in Chicago. So I think that's a little overrated. I think most athletes who are, sort of prove themselves love playing here. So, that whole thing gets a little overrated.
Yeah, definitely. It's a case of a few bad apples seems to be definitely, and they start bringing up the snowballs and Santa Claus thing that happened before I was born. So
Yeah, and if you forget all that stuff, there are idiots
yeah,
amongst us, right? I mean, that's
it's just
that's
what it is.
true. I mean, and drunken idiots are going to be doing things for sure. For sure, I'm not saying nothing happens. I'm not saying that at all.
When you talk about some of the iconic figures of the Big Five, Cheney or Martelli, who are some guys that maybe coaches that maybe don't get the shine that some other people of coaches do, but you think had a really tremendous impact on the tradition, or was a really great coach that maybe people overlook?
Yeah, let's think going back through, because interestingly, the coaches generally they get plenty
Flowers.
of attention. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, Fran Dunphy had an awesome run at Penn. Just I that was my first college beat, and they won 40 straight Ivy League games, and just the Cheney era at Temple. He before him was Don Casey. Before him was a Hall of Famer, Harry Litwack. Jim Lynam was the coach. He could have been the iconic St. Joe's coach for 30 years if he had chosen to, but went on. Interestingly, they famously beat DePaul
Mm.
in the NCAA tournament, top ranked DePaul in Dayton. And Jim Lynam, I believe I have this right, moved on to be the Sixers assistant coach after that, which is just, there's so many the paths are different than ever. Raleigh Massimino was a Penn assistant when he got the Villanova head coaching job. Just different.
Billy Lang was at Villanova before.
Billy Lang was at a bunch of places because
Yeah,
he actually worked for Herb McGee and he'd worked for Speedy Morris.
yep.
He worked twice for Jay Wright at Villanova. In between the times, he was Navy's head coach. But
Yep.
yeah, so I'm not really having a good answer. I mean, generally when teams make the NCAA tournament, the coaches get recognized. When Speedy Morris had a run with Lionel Simmons teams, for instance, and St. Joe's coach, the lineage goes back to Jack Ramsey being one of the great coaches in the history of basketball and most influential too.
Yeah, and you sort of mentioned the Dunphy, and people sort of point to his last season where he was sort of championed around and sort of paraded around for his success and all he's done for that sort of program. And it's from a St. Joe's perspective, it's interesting to see the dichotomy between that and what Phil Martelli was. I think he might have been expecting sort of that sort of last dance sort of thing before being ultimately terminated and moved on. Did you have a perspective on that, or I don't know if you wanted to share your opinion on?
Yeah, I mean, I've written a lot about it. I think it was handled about as poorly as a transition can be handled, and I put that on. I wrote that Mark Reed, who was the president, I gave him an F for it. I put it all on him and his board of trustees for how they handled it. I don't know that there would have been a good way to transition, to be honest with you. And I've written any number of times that there are no lifetime contracts for these coaches. And if St. Joe's decided it was time to move on from Phil Martelli, so be it. But trying to figure out, attempt to figure out a transition would have been helpful, because they did Billy Lang no favors having a transition that caused players and recruits to move on.
And a really good bunch of players too that could have been sort of
Really
a
good
team.
Yeah.
You talk about Jameer Nelson's son and Jared Bynum, who's has a lot of success.
Bones
So,
Highland was coming.
yeah.
Those fans don't like to hear that, but Bones
Yeah, he
Highland
was. I
said
think
that himself.
he said that recently, I think. Yeah, I think I saw that. Last question here about sort of your takeaway from covering so many great athletes in the space. Do you sort of, after some of these guys have sort of left the Big Five and gone on to the higher levels of professional sport, whether it be the NBA, whether it be a G League type, or whether it be, European League or something. Do you pay special attention to those players that you've had conversations with and, sort of had good relationships and saw their growth from high school, maybe sports to, sort of the pro level? And does that like, sort of give you a special gratitude towards these players because you know how much they've sort of put in and you love following them?
You definitely keep following them both personally and professionally. You want to see, what the path is. And it's sort of a changing path. More guys used to go to Europe. Now there's a little bit more of a path where they have more two-way contracts and can stay in this country. And when before the G League it was just such a minimum contract deal that you could make more money overseas. Now, like a Charlie Brown, for instance, could find his path that way, and it worked out for him. And there have been quite a few players where I thought, man, I don't know if they can. I thought they needed to go overseas, and I was been proven wrong a number of times because a roster is really bigger than it used to be. But yeah, you try to follow it and follow on Eurobasket. And I've gone overseas and written about some of these players.
I saw a
Went to
piece
Poland,
recently.
Rashid Bey from St. Joe's, and
Yeah,
Juwan Robinson, who was from North Philly and played at Rhode Island. They were sharing a point guard position in Poland. So I went to write about
yeah.
those two guys, and they were great. And I went to Iceland when Tyrone Garland was playing in the second division in Iceland. Went there in February to talk to him and write his story. I mean, he's famous for the Southwest Philly floater that
Yeah,
was
I saw that piece recently.
winning basket in 2013 for LaSalle getting to the Sweet 16. So yeah, you certainly naturally follow. I mean, same thing. It's not like, you're it's not keeping necessarily a personal relationship, but more a professional relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I won't keep you too long, but I'd like to talk to you for hours. You have a great insight into this game and sort of all the moving pieces around this community. So I really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we can discuss this some other time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks again, Mike.
Take care.
All right, bye.